Hey guys, Poultry here. Today I wanted to give an overview of the design philosophy evolution of Steve Fox from Tekken 7 to Tekken 8, going over some of his biggest changes and doing a little bit of theory crafting about how I feel players should go about tackling this new rendition of everyone's favorite boxer. A few quick disclaimers. I'm not a professional Tekken player by any stretch of the imagination, just a big fan of Steve's Tekken 7 rendition, observing how he plays out in the hands of high-level Steve players, and arguing with anyone I can in the Tekken Zaibatsu and Steve Fox discords. This video won't be beginner friendly, it's aimed more at players who already both understand Tekken's core mechanics, as well as the function of Steve's moves more generally. If you have a rough idea as to how he plays, this should be pretty easy going. I've got a rough script that I'm going to be referencing for this video, but it's not going to be highly structured. I might go on a few tangents, just keep that in mind. This is an exploration at most, and if you guys have any thoughts of your own about Steve in this game and his design philosophy, please leave them down below. I'd love to chat with you guys. I'll hopefully have a detailed Lionheart stance guide out soon, so make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss it. What stayed the same with Steve in Tekken 8? Well, the core of his neutral is largely still in place, and this is the most important thing. He's still operating around his jab a lot. I don't know if his jab has had its range buffed, but some of his pokes seem a little larger than they were in Tekken 7. Still doing a whole lot of 1-2-1, a whole lot of 1-1-2 as your I-10 Punisher. You're going to be using a lot of down forward 1, down forward 1-2. All of your extensions are still here, all of your stance transitions are still here. There have been changes to Tekken 8's movement. Lateral movement is a lot stronger in this game, but I haven't noticed a massive difference in terms of when I'm allowed to place my down forward 1. Remains to be seen whether or not it's been substantially changed in regards to the overarching system's mechanics. Your down 2-1, your down 1, your QCF2, your low pokes, these moves are all still working the exact same way they worked before. Down 2-1 has had a bit of a change actually. You no longer have access to your cancel to his wild man. He kind of had a pseudo wild man he could access by doing a really fast down 2-1-2, basically giving him a fairly decently ranged slow mid-mid that tracked to his weak side. You could also substitute out the second mid for a high if you did down 2-1 forward 2. A little bit confusing, that's no longer in this game. It was quite niche, only a few players were using it, so sucks to be you if you were, but it's not in this game anymore. It does mean that there's never going to be an input issue. You're never going to bodge your down 2-1s. You're always going to get exactly what you want. While running 2, still a pretty important part of Steve's neutral. Still a plus frames on block move, but as you can see it's also got some new and improved heat shenanigans going on. Most notably, normal hit launcher and heat. So that's a little bit scary. But rotating around to the crux of his neutral, his back 1 and his down forward 2. These moves are still being placed in the exact same ways they were being placed in Tekken 7. Obviously with Tekken 8's heat mechanics you got to be a lot more mindful of your opponent's current game state. If they are in heat, you need to be more mindful about when you choose to whiff these moves, how you choose to place them, but you are still using them in the exact same ways as before. Down forward 2, however, is a little bit different. You can see now that it doesn't actually give us a knockdown anymore, which does mean that Steve's old Shiro combo is dead. Instead, you've got 3 options you can go for. On a read, and near a wall ideally, you can go for Gatling. The reason why I say on a read is because you won't be cancelling your duck stance in order to do this. You gotta just mash it out. So down forward 2, forward 3, mash out your 1+2s. What we will be doing 99% of the time will be one of the following 2 things. Wildman and his new while standing 2-2, which I'm going to bodge. There we go. So these are really important, and his while standing 2 in particular is very illustrative of the design philosophy changes between Tekken 7 and Tekken 8, but we'll get to that shortly. So as we can see, his pokes are largely remaining the same. He's still got neutral control with his back 1, his down forward 2, his while running 2. So what's changed in essence? Steve's access to momentum swings in neutral are much more pronounced, but his ability to bolster his neutral with niche tools has been diminished. His alternative game plans and win conditions center more around mix-ups and aggression now than they did around counter hitting in Tekken 7. And the easiest way for me to illustrate this design philosophy evolution from Tekken 7 Steve to Tekken 8 Steve is by looking at his duck stance and his while standing 2. So duck has never really been as core a stance to his kit as some of his other stances or his other moves, outside of making moves safe. But the changes present in Tekken 8 are pretty illustrative of a larger point. So let's have a quick overview of duck in Tekken 7. The primary way in which it was used was making many of your moves safer on block and recover faster on whiff, most notably your down forward 2. So if we do this here, you can see that that's -2 on block, right? But if I don't do a duck cancel, -11. Same with out in the neutral. This has a lot more recovery than this, and this also recovers in crouch. Very good for playing against scary highs. If you're afraid your opponent's going to try and challenge you in neutral with a high, you'll be chilling. You're going to go under it. It's also good for advancing towards the opponent while avoiding highs. You can actually link these together. You can also create timing checks with subsequent duck cancels to fish for counter hits. So something that was a really strong secondary game plan for Steve in Tekken 7 was playing around his duck stance as a timing stance. What this essentially means is if you've ever fought against a Mishima before, you'll know that if you try to react to a Mishima player wave dashing at you and stick out a button to intercept him, if he does an electric off of his first wave dash, you lose that interaction every single time. Like, you can't react to it, you will die. And the same kind of thing was possible with Steve, where if he ducked at you once and let out a while standing 2, he would counter hit launch you if you pressed something on reaction, right? What did that allow you to do? Well, it meant that as soon as you've pressed duck now, you've set a precedent, you've created a checkpoint in the neutral that the following interaction is now going to be based around. And so what Steve players would do is they would duck, hold black, and they'd kind of just see where their opponent pressed, and they'd count the amount of ducks. It'd be like, he pressed after 3 ducks, so next time, 1, 2, boom, counter hit. It kind of helps to demystify confusion in neutral. This is possible with slide characters, wave dash characters, any character that's got some kind of stance, and especially movement stances, can be really useful for. It also allows you, his duck stance would allow you to punish your opponent for respecting your counter hit tools. So it wasn't just a matter of ducking in and doing while standing 2. If that's all Steve could do, there'd be no reason to ever press. You could just wait for him to do his thing, take your plus frames and mix them up. But Steve had access to extended duck. And extended duck is pretty scary for a number of reasons. I'm just going to set this guy to standing block. Extended duck forward 2 was a guard break high. So this basically functioned like a low, and if you were to do 2 in a row, so an extended duck forward 2 into a duck forward 2, you would knock them down even if they blocked it. And you could also go for extended duck forward 2 into wild man if you had the execution for it, which was safer to do and gave you more damage. So most Steves were trying to go for that. As you can see in this game, neither exist. Right? We get a nice bit of chip damage, but it's not nearly as strong as it was in Tekken 7. So, food for thought there. The speed of duck cancels in Tekken 7 were also really fast. In Tekken 8, they do feel a little bit clunky, and I'll illustrate that a little later on. And his while standing 2 in Tekken 7, as I've been saying, was a counter hit launcher. In this game, it's no longer a counter hit launcher, and that's quite important for a number of reasons. And it really diminishes the strength of the extended duck quote-unquote mix-up. So, Tekken 8. Let's just focus now on Tekken 8 and how duck stance works in this game. The stance seems to be slow to cancel, as we've just noted. It definitely feels slower, but also there are block situations where Steve gets less access to defensive play than what he had in Tekken 7. So if I set this bot to do a jab after he blocks my down forward 2, you used to be able to parry here. This is me trying to input a parry. No bueno. That's pretty important because in Tekken 7, what it meant was you had a way to deter your opponent from jabbing, down forward 1ing, doing a generic down forward 2. You could cover a whole bunch of options because Steve is in crouch. So even though he's only -2, your move pool is limited. So that's one way in which his defensive capabilities have kind of been nerfed with the duck stance. Extended ducks mix-up, also substantially less scary outside of heat than the extended duck mix-up in Tekken 7. That being said, they have given him some kind of compensation with his extended duck, because now his Gatling is quite a lot better than it was in Tekken 7. And reason being, in Tekken 7, if your Gatling got blocked even a hair outside of butt sniffing range, the whole thing was going to whiff. Your opponent could just hold back in a lot of instances. They wouldn't even need to backdash, and your string would whiff. All of the individual hits had a lot of recovery on whiff, so your opponent could just stand there and wait for you to whiff as many hits as you felt comfortable whiffing and then toss out a launcher. Just really wasn't good, wasn't consistent. It had some niche case uses. If you got 1-1-2 on hit, you could frame trap with Gatling, but it was a risk. In this game, they stay right on you. Not only that, every hit's -9, so safe. Last hit's only -12. I'm not too sure what it was in Tekken 7, but given it would often whiff, it didn't matter, you get launched anyway. This is a fully hit confirmable mid knockdown that comes out at the same speed pretty much as Duck Forward 2. That's 15 frames, that's 16 frames, right? Really, really cool. I feel like there's going to be a lot of cool use cases for this, and I think it's going to be something that's going to showcase differences between different Steve players. The most important key to this puzzle for me is Steve's new while standing 2. It's no longer a counter hit launcher, and it's instead Steve's new 13 frame punisher from crouch. This change is the biggest in my view for demonstrating the design philosophy shift from Tekken 7 to Tekken 8, because in essence, Steve's new while standing 2, or should I say while standing 2-2, is his momentum and mix-ups tool. The first hit alone has no counter hit properties at all. That +4 is the same regardless of counter hit or normal hit, and it's -7 on block. The utility as a timing check has been severely diminished. We've already got while standing 1-2 as a counter hit confirm in both games. Duck 1 is slower than Steve's old while standing 2, so you can't really be going for this kind of gameplay as effectively in Tekken 8. You know, you're going to be fishing more for this, or you're just going to be risking it on a Duck 1, or maybe even a Gatling, right? So his Duck spammy gameplay looks quite different in Tekken 8. The move is instead used primarily in whiff and block punishment situations, or after a successful down forward 2 counter hit where a clean duck cancel will get you a guaranteed while standing 2-2. It is cool that this is a little bit of an execution barrier. Not every Steve player is going to be going for this all the time. Not every Steve player will be able to get this all the time. So even though Shira combo has been removed, I am stoked that there's some degree of skill expression in how this move works. The extension is delayable as well on this string. So even though you're not going to be using it as a neutral check like you were using the old while standing 2, there is a degree to which you can mess with people by delaying it. When while standing 2-2 hits, Steve enters into his new Lionheart stance at +11. This is a pretty major frame advantage situation. Most of his Lionheart transitions are like +7 or even +3, but while standing 2-2 and forward 2-2, you get the +11, which is really, really powerful. In Lionheart, you've got access to 3 options. Your Lionheart 1. This is the move that enables the stance off of his lower frame transitions, like his +7s and his +3s. This is what's going to interrupt your opponent pressing anything. This is what might potentially interrupt some power crushes at +7 if they're slower startup. This will be like your very good catch-all. He's then got Lionheart 2. This is -13, but it's an instant tornado mid launcher. Hits from a mile away, so any of you Feng gamers out there can probably already think of a few ways to use this. Decent tracking. It's pretty much homing off of while standing 2-2 and off of back 1-2. I think it depends on your character whether or not you're going to be able to step this one consistently. And then finally, final piece to this puzzle is his while standing Lionheart 1+2. So Lionheart 1+2 is a pretty interesting move because you might have already guessed it. It's a guard break. Gives you guaranteed +12. Which lets Steve do a 1-1-2, a 2-2, a 2-1. And this is how he basically coerces you into ducking the stance. Now, there are a few small things to note with it. Comes out a lot slower than the other 2 moves at 20 frames as opposed to 16 and 14. So depending on the skill level of your opponent, they might be able to fuzzy the stance. That being said, the stance is delayable. So I can choose to wait as long as I want before I press something. Not only that, this stance gives you full access to all of your other stance shenanigans. So say you hit them with a back 1-2 and you want to play safe, you can go for a duck cancel and you can block a lot of stuff. Very, very useful against power crushes, for example. The weaves are very useful against jab retaliation and the likes. One other thing to note with his Lionheart stance, and this is something that's really rubbed a lot of Steve players the wrong way, is if we look at his up back 2, looks pretty innocuous. We've got this +3 high that's homing, pretty cool. I can opt to transition into Lionheart if I just press up back 2 by itself. If I hold back though, I've got free reign to do whatever I want. This does not apply for any other transition that he's got. Forced into stance. Forced into stance. Forced into stance. What this means is there are a lot of instances where, say you want to use something like Steve's back 1-2, something that you could use during scrapping situations quite effectively in Tekken 7. It feels a lot riskier now. Because if this whiffs anywhere on the screen, up close, at range, Steve's stuck in his little dance until he's got time to do a cancel. So if I do a duck cancel as fast as possible, you got quite a bit of time to hit him there. So that's food for thought. It does make some of his moves a bit riskier. So why do I think that duck and while standing 2 are really emblematic of these design philosophy shifts? Well, from the aforementioned, we can see that Steve players will be encouraged to take more risks, both in terms of block frames or recovery, and the kinds of situations they set up. There's a lot of wanting to go into this 3-button stance and try and mix your opponent up, right? Emphasis on the can 50-50s in the open without a requirement for the wall. This is a pretty big deal. Steve's actually able to make comebacks now without the wall quite effectively. Back in Tekken 7, if you were at like 40% health and your opponent had a full stick of butter, there wasn't a whole lot you could do if you weren't at a wall. Like, you're going for down 2-1, you're going for down 1, full crouch down forward 1, or you're risking it all on hoping that you've conditioned them enough to open them up to an extended duck mix-up, right? In this game, if I hit you with this, I can immediately take a chunk out of your health bar. I can loop the situation in certain instances. If you try and mash back into it, he's got ways to shut you down and force you to make decisions out in the open, which is something that he didn't have nearly as much in Tekken 7 without the aforementioned rage or the wall. There's also been a change with somewhat niche but still game plan defining options getting pushed away from the counter hit field and into the punishment and mix up field, so most notably with his while standing 2, but also just stuff like down forward 2 now being a transition into while standing 2 rather than being a full launch. There's less resetting to neutral, and there's a whole lot more pressing your advantage. We can actually see some of these conceptual changes in changes to his other niche moves as well. So my favorite move in Tekken 7 was Steve's flicker 1 down 1. I adored this move, and the gist of the move is if your opponent is starting to scout out your back ones and is looking for a launch attempt, they're trying to duck and hit you with something big, they ostensibly have to do a twitch react. They can't just toss out a down forward 2 purely on a hard confirmation. They have to see your left arm come out and they have to immediately press their button because back one's whiff recovery is so good. That's where this move would come in, because when they stand up to try and press into what they believe is a back 1, which is actually a flicker jab, they get blown up by a counter hit launcher, and it would easily take off like 75 to 80 damage. It was a lot of damage. In this game, as you can see, you only get a guaranteed chunk afterwards. I'm not sure what max damage is, but it's substantially nerfed from its Tekken 7 iteration. And you can see that I got a parry there just a second ago. This is very easy to do accidentally because of a big systems-wide, like whole game-wide change to parries. I think parries have been universalized now as a back 1+3 input. In order to do flicker 1 immediately, you do back 3+4 and then 1, right? So it's very easy to accidentally do back 3+4+1, basically, and get your parry. So that's a bit frustrating. You can't be quite as smooth with it, and the reward is much lower. So I think there's going to be more incentive for people to just go for his flicker 1, forward 1 instead. Given that it's a mid, it's already safer, because the diminished reward doesn't make the risk worth it, to me at least. You can also see this with back 1-2. As I mentioned before, back 1-2's forced transition into his Lionheart, so that for one is immediately pointing towards this mix-up direction. But also, the move no longer counter hits if you do the whole string. That really diminishes its potency in those scrapping situations I was mentioning earlier, where there's a chance your opponent might press, you're not certain, you're thinking you're going to catch them with the second hit, but you actually catch them with the first hit. Now you're just going to go into stance. So it does make it a more consistent experience, I guess. It means players aren't going to be getting confused, trying to figure out whether or not they need to go for a combo starter or go for a mix-up. But it's definitely a nerf. Another change that's kind of emblematic of these overall conceptual changes is Steve's forward 2. This is a move I adored in Tekken 7, and it now has a mid extension that creates the same situation as while standing 2-2 if it connects. Plus 11. That's a massive deal. That's really, really strong. Forward 2 was already really, really good in Tekken 7, and in my view, really underappreciated, because you've basically got a full screen safe mid. It may be 21 frames, but the size of the hitbox means you could use it pretty comfortably before a lot of faster moves and snake your way in. And you had this high extension that had insanely fast block recovery, regardless of what stance you chose to go into afterwards. So you could do forward 2-1 hold forward for peekaboo, super fast auto guard, forward 2-1 back for flicker, super fast guard, forward 2-1 nothing, and you could delay the hell out of the high extension. Very, very hard to punish. Very, very good move, even just with those. I barely even used the mid fake out. I didn't even feel that I needed to use it, but a lot of other Steve players have had success with it. Now, we've got this. Delayable while standing 2-2 adjacent extension. Really awesome stuff. Really just bolsters the idea that this character is trying to snake in, even from full screen, to run his mix-ups on you. Multiple power mids now allow for heat dashes. They now allow for potential combo opportunities, which is pretty insane. So if I go into heat here, a lot of you are going to be really upset at this, but check this out. That's right. QCF1 is now a launcher on normal hit in heat. Pretty absurd. We've also got while running 2, which I believe was mentioned earlier. We've also got slightly more niche, but still really cool, Albatross 2. And all of these moves are giving you plus frames on block as well. While running 2 is a pretty interesting one, because you actually get less plus frames on block if you do it from the heat dash than you do if you just do while running 2 by itself. But with the other ones, very, very important to note that your QCF1 and your Albatross 2 will be giving you plus frames. In tandem with these buffs to Steve's power mids while he's in heat, his down back 3-2 change makes a whole lot more sense. So down back 3-2 in Tekken 7 was a knockdown. In Tekken 8, it's a transition into Lionheart. It would probably be a little bit too obnoxious trying to deal with Steve at the wall if he was in heat, you know, doing a while running 2 into a QCF1 into a down back 3-2 into a whatever. That was already really, really obnoxious in Tekken 7, so down back 3-2 has been changed somewhat to fit his more aggressive, mental stack heavy standing game plan. My thoughts on the whole is that Tekken 8 Steve will be played primarily as the same neutral monster he was in Tekken 7, rotating his down forward 2 and his back 1, pestering the legs with his relatively safe or just straight up safe high crushing lows, and safely overwhelming the opponent with his litany of fast and safe pokes. Where I think things are going to change in a big way is the newfound focus on the open field 50-50s, and a reduction in the overall effectiveness of his safe counter hit game due to changes to a lot of secondary or tertiary options. It's more immediately understandable how to play hot and cold with Tekken 8 Steve, with Steve having numerous ways to access Lionheart on a dime, and with the stance itself having very streamlined, easy access to reward, both from punishment and as a call-out backswing for you Fang gamers. I know a lot of you like to mash your own heat bursts right after a heat burst gets blocked. Maybe don't do that against Steve, because he will just dart to range 10 and launch you for it. I've gotten way too many rounds doing that. I feel that high-level Steve players are going to need to mine Lionheart for its defensive nuances in order to really make the most out of it, because against players with good defense and good option rotation, periodically opting to use duck cancels, weaves, or avoiding the stance entirely if the game state isn't favorable is going to be really, really important. These transitions, the +7 and most importantly I think the +3, from his up back 2 on block, you need to use your weaves. You need to use your duck cancels. Otherwise, you are going to get blown up by power crushes. You are going to get blown up by heat. This isn't to say it's doomed by any stretch of the imagination. This is a momentum-oriented stance where both players are forced to do something. So if that's not your playstyle, if that seems antithetical to the kind of ultra-safe Steve mentality a lot of players had in Tekken 7, it's no surprise to me why this character is going to be divisive for a lot of you, but I do think we're going to have to lean into that stance. The stance seems relatively feature complete so long as you're using all of his stance options as well as the buttons. His heat duck mechanic is a little bit of a strange can of worms, with the throw mix-up seeming fairly costly to his heat meter, especially if it gets broken. But the non-duck options are also pretty damn scary. You've got terrifying mids out the arse. I believe that Steve's new heat duck isn't going to be used nearly as much as his other options in heat. And I think his heat is actually just going to be budget Tekken 7 Steve, to be honest. Because for as limited as the reward is relative to Tekken 7, 49 damage, right? And I've got counter hit on, so it's technically even less. What's important to note with this is, one, heat is you can activate heat whenever you want. So you can be in this rage state whenever you want. And two, you get your +5, right? Why is this important? If you've already got a life lead, and Steve is very good at getting a life lead, say you get your opponent down to roughly rage %, you can just give yourself access to this safe knockdown I-14 mid that hits from full screen and tracks both ways. So even though the reward is massively slim relative to Tekken 7 rather, you've got way more immediate access to this move. Not only that, if you want a little bit more damage and don't mind spending a couple of extra frames, you've got this. I've done a bit of labbing on these moves, and Steve's one seems really good because a lot of these moves actually have holes in them. Brian's, for example, you can sidestep the final hit. Devil Jin's, depending on the character you're playing, you can sidestep his final hit, or one of the options into his Morning Crow or something. Steve's one seems pretty airtight. You can't really do anything about it once you've blocked the first hit, which is pretty crazy. Also goes into plus frames into Lionheart, so this is a really good way to just try and swing momentum back in your favor. Even if you don't hit them with this, you may just hit them with this. And then maybe you can get greedy, right? Whole lot of ways to get greedy with this character's offense. And that's not to mention the aforementioned buffs to his QCF1s and the likes. He's just a mids dispenser in the neutral when he's got heat active. In closing, fans of Tekken 7 Steve may have some gripes with how he fits into Tekken 8 on both a move list and a systems level. You know, low parry is weaker in this game, which is obviously a pretty good deal for Steve, but the heat system also means there's a whole host of terrifying moves to navigate in the neutral that just weren't there before. And with these small nerfs to stuff like flicker 1 down 1, that kind of adds up. It means you've got to be a lot more careful with how you're using your back ones. Players who do adopt Lionheart wholesale are going to be spending a lot of time at -9 in a game where mix-ups are a lot scarier too. You're going to be using this move a lot. You just will. So it's food for thought. They've buffed his Power Crush. It's now a lot stronger than it was in Tekken 7. It's down back 1+2. So he isn't completely strapped for defensive options, even if there's been a nerf to his parry, but higher risk. We're always returning to this concept of higher risk. If you loved playing around duck timings and flicker counter hit fishing, this iteration of Steve may disappoint you, though the addition of his new I-12 Punisher in 2-2 is really cool. It gives you a way to back up into the neutral off of a punish. The 2 jabs had its range buffed, so if you weren't a huge fan of using 2-1, if you felt it was too sticky, if you'd rather just go back into the neutral, 2-2 is the move for you. Probably not going to be a bad option to use in scrapping if you don't mind taking the risk too, because this is going to punish people who are trying to flash duck you. Final move that I haven't mentioned at any point in this video, and that I'm not certain how it fits into his Tekken 8 design ethos, but is something that is undeniably cool, is his new Swindler. This move is one of the coolest moves in the game. I think it's got the coolest name of any move in Steve's kit, and it does pretty much what it says on the tin. It's there to swindle you. Remains to be seen how good this move will be. You can be interrupted by up to I-14 moves if you do back 1 on block into Swindler, and it'll trade with I-15 moves. So if you trade with like a generic down forward 2 or something, neither of you are going to get a combo. But it's going to have some utility, especially off of stuff like his right weave 1. His left weave 1 in this game is really, really strong because you've got access to your Lionheart transition, which is a mid-high, but you've also got the previous options he had in left weave 1-1 and left weave 1 forward, left weave 1 forward 1, which also has a third high hit extension. So Steve had really good ways to deter you from ducking this move here, but from the right, doesn't really have anything. That's where Swindler comes in. If your opponent is trying to play defensively and they try and stick out a button, they're going to get blown up. Really, really cool move. I'm hoping that Steve players start to use Swindler a lot. I have a feeling that some players are going to incorporate it into their signature style. And I hope that this video has been informative. I hope it's been fun. If you guys have any opinions or any thoughts about the state of Steve in Tekken 8, please leave them down below. I'd love to chat with you guys about it. Please hit subscribe if you enjoyed watching this one. We're going to have a Lionheart guide up pretty soon, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!